Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for being here today. As we have discussed the decennial census in this committee, I want to make this point perfectly clear. It is not controversial to count who is in the United States. In fact, it is important for us to know how many people are living within our nation's borders and within our individual states, so that we can properly and fairly distribute federal funds. Without these raw numbers, there is no way for us to ensure our citizens have sufficient funds to access critical programs like Medicaid, SNAP, Pell Grants, and other important programs. We need to know how many people within the United States are school-aged and accessing public schools. This number is critical for correctly appropriating federal funds to our states for their school systems. Even further, census data is used to calculate funding for the National School Lunch Program. Without proper data, it is impossible to ensure each state has adequate funding to provide lunches for impoverished students. Mr. Secretary, are you aware that there are 132 programs use Census Bureau data to distribute more than $650 billion in federal funds just in fiscal year 2015?
I'm well aware that the census data are used as part of the appropriation process. I'm not conversant with the exact numbers you cited, but it's certainly big numbers.
Mr. Secretary, did you know the top 5 programs which use Census Bureau data to distribute funds are Medicaid, SNAP, Medicare Part B, highway construction funds through the Department of Transportation, and Pell Grants through the Department of Education?
Surprised me at all.
Mr. Secretary, did you know decennial census data is used to determine a rural community, a suburban community, and an urban community?
I believe that is the case, yes, ma'am.
Census data is necessary to determine what is rural and what is not. This data is used to determine who is in my district that is eligible for rural grants and aid. There are 22 programs at the Department of Agriculture and 33 programs at the Department of Health and Human Services that use this data to distribute federal funds. Even further, there are 16 programs at the Department of Education, 13 at the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and even 7 in the Department of Justice. Without this critical data, so many of our constituents would not receive sufficient access to these programs. That's why I'm even more surprised that my colleagues don't want to fully count the number of people within our borders. For the first time, using census data, Congress could get an accurate picture of how many citizens use these important federal programs, and also how many non-citizens are using federal programs. I think my constituents would want to know about where their tax dollars are going to support federal benefits for non-citizens. Mr. Secretary, would you agree that this is an important public policy goal?
I'm well aware that the census data is importantly relied on for a whole wide variety of public policy objectives, and I'm very proud of the fact that that is the case.
Thank you very much. I yield the rest of my time to Ms.